From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Tony Gray. We begin in Venezuela, where in the last few minutes, President Nicolas Maduro has confirmed that he will not be going to the Summit of the Americas, which is beginning in Peru. Maduro said the summit had become a waste of time and that he would remain with his people in Venezuela. He lamented the attitude of the Peruvian government, which had withdrawn its invitation to Maduro, and then said that it would not provide any security if he decided to go anyway. U.S. President Donald Trump has also canceled his trip to the Summit of the Americas. He will not travel to Colombia either, as he had planned. Peru's new president, Martin Vizcarra, said he was sad that Trump wasn't coming, but was reassured by the news that Vice President Mike Pence would attend instead.
We
regret Trump's decision not to attend the Summit of the Americas. I think his presence would have been very important. Nonetheless, Vice President Mike Pence will be replacing him. That means the United States ratifies the importance of the summit. Even though the President will not be attending the summit, the United States will be participating, meaning that all the deals discussed in the summit will be supported by the U.S., since it's a very important country.
Our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, has more on the Americas Summit and the Alternative Peoples Summit taking place at the same time.
The White House has just confirmed in a statement that U.S. President Donald Trump will not participate in the Summit of the Americas in Lima, which will take place on April 13th and 14th. Michael Pence will attend on his behalf. In the meantime, social groups are already organizing themselves for an alternative summit, the Summit of the People. Peruvian and Cuban students gathered yesterday to exchange their experiences of their political struggles. In the meantime, the Summit of the People continues with self-organized workshops. Latin American delegations will participate and will share their goals, how they will try to participate in government decisions and impose an agenda that will benefit the people and the civil society. The summit's inauguration and the welcoming of the different delegations are planned for this evening in the district of Jesus Maria in Lima. In addition to discussing objectives and goals, there will also be cultural events to pay homage to the Cuban and Venezuelan fight against imperialism. They will also pay homage to the struggle of leaders like Lula da Silva and Cristina Fernandez, who are currently fighting to stay included in the political process. This is just the beginning of the Summit of the People.
U.S. President Donald Trump has cited escalating tensions with Syria as the reason he will not be attending the Summit of the Americas. Along with allies including France and Britain, Trump has threatened a forceful response to an alleged chemical attack in Syria. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation, where the U.S. said it is prepared to act alone if not supported by the other members. Tension between the United States and Russia has escalated over claims that at least 40 people died in the chemical attack on Saturday in the Syrian town of Douma. Many Western countries say a toxic gas was used and that the Syrian government, backed by Russia, was responsible. However, the Russians say they have not found any trace of chemical weapon use in Douma. And earlier we spoke to our Washington correspondent, Jorge Gestoso, about the looming military intervention in Syria, and he told us about some stumbling blocks the U.S. is already facing.
What we did know officially this morning is that now they're talking publicly about this, that Russia is jamming the GPS of the airplanes, you know, the non-tripulated planes, the drones that are overflying the area. And for the U.S., the drones plays a key role because they're doing some reconnaissance mode in the area. So that presents a large difficulty, or a new officially admitted difficulty, for the Americans if eventually we're planning to send, as they did the last time, missiles to the area.
Now, for more on these escalating tensions, we're being joined now by the U.S. author, journalist, and blogger Max Blumenthal. He is a senior editor at The Real News and is the author of best-selling books Republican Gomorrah, Inside the Movement That Shattered the Party, and Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. Max, as someone who has written a great deal about Syria, what do you make of these latest accusations against the Syrian government for using chemical weapons?
Well, thanks for having me on. The Syrian government was taking back key areas from foreign-backed jihadist groups. In this case, the Army of Islam. It had taken East Ghouta, and it was on the verge of, or had taken, an area to its south called Douma. And every time that we see the Syrian army, the Syrian government advancing and liberating these major areas from insurgent groups backed by foreign powers, there is an allegation of chemical weapons use. We recently saw it last year, about a year ago, in Khan Sheikhoun in Al-Qaeda-occupied Idlib, and now we see it again in Douma by the Army of Islam. No evidence was provided except for photographs disseminated by the US, UK, and Qatari-backed group, the White Helmets. We also saw the Syrian American Medical Society make a claim of chemical weapons use. This is another group backed by the United States. These are not credible sources. These are groups that work hand in glove with jihadists inside Syria. And on the basis of those claims, we are on the verge of war. We stand on the verge of another disastrous regime change war that could potentially throw another country into chaos.
Now, Max, the talk of Trump and his team is one of a military response to this alleged attack, and it's certainly being echoed by the more hawkish media outlets. What kind of action do you think we're going to see from the U.S. and its allies?
Well, actually, we see no dissent within mainstream American media on this issue. American media appears to be far less diverse and free than media in countries like Russia or Venezuela, which are routinely demonized in the U.S. And so the American public has not sufficiently mobilized against an attack on Syria, and an attack would be absolutely disastrous. However, it's not clear what Trump is willing to do. We saw Trump in the 2016 campaign raise his own questions about the nature of the Syrian rebels and accurately call them jihadists. He's now under enormous pressure from neoconservatives. His national security director, John Bolton, has never met a war he doesn't like. And so we could be seeing any moment cruise missile strikes on Syria. We also have to be mindful of what's happening in back-channel talks with Moscow, which has extremely invested itself in the stability of Syria and in preventing another Iraq or Libya-style situation.
Now, Max, we want to turn a little bit to U.S.-Russia relations as it relates to the Syria incident. We have seen political and military mobilization against Syria, one of Russia's key allies in the Middle East, which follows on from the accusations against Russia over the Skripal poisoning case in Britain, which the U.S. was very vocal about. Do you think that Russia is the real target here?
Absolutely. I mean, this incident is taking place against the backdrop of Russiagate, which is a manufactured scandal that has failed to prove collusion between the Trump 2016 presidential campaign and the Russian government. The Skripal case was clearly aimed at Russia, and that has fallen apart too. And even mainstream sources in the UK are forced to admit that they can no longer clearly point the finger at Moscow. And so we see another incident aimed at Russia, which is the key guarantor of Syria's stability. And these various other incidences should cause us to call into question the claims by Syrian insurgent groups about a chemical attack. In this case, though, we are going to probably see an OPCW, Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, investigation on the ground. Because the Syrian army and the Syrian government have retaken Douma, they can guarantee the safety of those investigators. There has been no investigation from the ground on the alleged chemical attack that took place a year ago in Al-Qaeda-controlled Idlib, which triggered U.S. military action. And so, the public really needs to start asking questions, because all of the claims, the key substantial claims in Russiagate, in the Skripal case, have fallen apart. And I think if we could see a real investigation on the ground in Syria, I think a lot of those who are issuing skepticism will be vindicated.
Now, Max, you've written a lot about the blowback from the invasion of Iraq. Iraq, what do you think would be the blowback from the potential toppling of the Assad regime?
Well, we saw in Libya, for example, the taking of large areas of territory by ISIS in Sirte, which was Gaddafi's former hometown. We saw Al-Qaeda take over, basically overtake the security services in Tripoli and Benghazi for a time, open-air slave auctions. Syria would be far more catastrophic if there were an Iraq-style intervention that removed the Syrian government and all of its institutions. And the only groups that would stand to gain would be jihadist groups like the Army of Islam and the Al-Qaeda affiliate that controls Idlib. That's a terrifying scenario, and it should terrify everyone across the region. We would also see possibly the destabilization of Lebanon as well.
Thank you so much, Max Blumenthal, for your insight on this particular issue. We've been talking to Max Blumenthal. He's the senior editor at The Real News about the escalating situation in Syria and possible increasing military action from the U.S. Other news now, the arrest of the former FARC negotiator Jesus Santrich on drug charges could damage the group's landmark peace deal with the Colombian government as it enters its most critical point. A spokesman for the former rebel group warned on Tuesday.
We demand the president to keep his word, for him to fulfill the agreement and what was agreed in the referendum recently. We are demanding an emergency meeting.
And now let's take a look at some of the first reactions from both sides since the news of Santrich's arrest broke late on Monday afternoon.
In an official statement, the FARC party called on Colombians to keep pushing for peace and sent support to Santrich, who has been on a hunger strike. Jesus Santrich was arrested for alleged drug trafficking on Monday at the request of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. In a press conference, FARC leader Iván Márquez says the detention threatens the Havana Accords and leaves the peace process in a critical situation.
With the capture of our colleague Jesus Santrich, the peace process is at its most critical point and threatens to become a complete failure.
FARC supporters have been protesting against the arrest outside the Colombian Attorney General's office. They are calling for the Havana Agreement to be implemented in full and are criticizing the Colombian government for submitting to the detention request from the United States.
This is extremely serious because it sends a disastrous, demoralizing message and creates a lot of uncertainty. In addition to the undermining of the Havana Agreement, it's a very bad message for the Colombian people, for the former combatants, and for the peace that our country so badly needs.
Now, the Colombian government says the detention was carried out according to the rule of law and should not affect the Havana agreements. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos gave a press conference shortly after the news broke on Monday evening.
The accord is very clear. He who commits a crime after the signing of the final agreement will be subject to prosecution under regular jurisdiction for new crimes committed. The General Prosecutor of the nation has informed me of the results of rigorous investigations. There is concrete and conclusive evidence that prove that Seusis Hernandez, known as Jesus Santrich, has committed the crime of drug trafficking following the signing of the agreement.
The DEA is accusing Jesus Santrich of exporting 10 tons of cocaine with a street value of $320 million to the United States. Now, many in Colombia see this as an attempt by the U.S. to sabotage the peace agreement.
Brazil's Workers' Party, the PT, will temporarily relocate its headquarters to Curitiba to be closer to former President Lula da Silva, who is being held prisoner there. The president of the PT, Galice Hoffman, explained that they decided to relocate because they believe that Lula is a political prisoner. The PT also reaffirmed that Lula, despite complying with an arrest warrant issued by the judge Sergio Moro, is their presidential candidate for October's election. Lula has told his critics that if they don't want him to be president, they should go to the polls and vote against him, and not resort to tricks to prevent his candidacy. And thousands of Brazilians also continue to rally there to demand Lula's freedom. Our correspondent is on site with this update.
We are here at Lula Libre Camp, a small resistance city where people from all around the country are flocking. There are music shows to cheer on Lula's followers. They gather here to support Lula, who is serving the beginning of his sentence no more than 100 meters from here. This stand is made up of people who want to support Lula, write letters to thank him or ask him for things, The Workers' Party still considers him as their official candidate. They also send Lula hope messages to let him know that the resistance is still alive here in Curitiba, outside the federal police outpost. We will continue waiting here for the arrival of 10 governors from different states of Brazil. They will come to show political support and solidarity for Lula in this difficult moment.
We're going to take a short break, but join us again after a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Some 600 migrants in Mexico City who remain part of a dwindling caravan have marched to the city's iconic Basilica of Guadalupe, chanting and waving signs against U.S. President Donald Trump. The caravan had about 1,500 migrants at its peak, but people left the group after immigration authorities intervened in the southern town of Matias Romero and screened men, women, and children following pressure from President Trump. Organizers decided to end the caravan in Mexico City instead of at the U.S. border, as had previously been intended.
Donald Trump has already done what he had to do. Very well. He has his right. He has used us in a certain way, but really the people who have the right to ask asylum can exercise it in an orderly manner. A peaceful way, a way with dignity.
Trinidad and Tobago has formally apologized to Dominica for the embarrassment caused at a meeting of the OAS last month. The Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Dennis Moses, told the Parliament he personally offered his apologies to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Dominica. Trinidad and Tobago came under heavy scrutiny from CARICOM member states after they declined Dominica's request to be exempted from paying their OAS fees while they recovered from Hurricane Maria. Moses hinted that the government accepted the apology and noted that the two prime ministers are always in constant contact.
In the best tradition of the close, warm and fraternal ties that exist between our countries, that is Dominica and Trinidad and Tobago, my interaction with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, my interaction with the Foreign Affairs Minister of Dominica was such that no further communique was deemed necessary.
Also in Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has fired a member of his cabinet amidst multiple allegations of sexual harassment. As Minister of Sport, Darrell Smith was accused of sexual harassment by his former assistant in a case that was settled in the industrial court for $22,500. There were also multiple reports alleging Smith had sexually harassed several employees in his ministry. On Monday, the Prime Minister demoted Smith to junior minister in the Ministry of Housing. However, there was public outcry calling for his dismissal. One day later, Prime Minister Rowley fired the minister, saying new information had come to his attention. Now, as the Atlantic hurricane season is less than 2 months away, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and the Global Climate Change Alliance have launched a climate change and sustainable land management awareness project in the region. The project is in the form of a whiteboard animation aimed at simplifying climate change while reaching a maximum number of people. The project's designer explains how it works.
I think oftentimes we take for granted what climate change is. We just think that, oh, it's when there's flooding and etc. But there are a lot of other variables to climate change. And for us, we just wanted to show the different areas that the project is seeking to highlight and to affect when we talk about climate change and sustainable land management.
In Chile, all attempts to avoid a land express strike have failed and flights are grounded from midnight Monday. The cabin crew union announced its plan to start an indefinite strike on Saturday, but continue to take part in talks mediated by the government. Those talks ended on Monday, and the union says the company did not make any new proposals to the wage issues and they didn't want to extend mediation. The airline cancelled thousands of flights last week in anticipation of the strike. Well, that takes us into the break, but join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Facebook Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg has testified before Congress, saying that he does not believe his company is a monopoly. Facebook faces a growing crisis of confidence among users, advertisers, employees, and investors after acknowledging that up to 87 million people, mostly in the United States, had their personal information harvested from the site by Cambridge Analytica, a political consultancy company. And ahead of Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg's Senate hearing, an army of 100 life-size Mark Zuckerberg cardboard cutouts stood on the Capitol lawn in Washington, D.C. The cardboard cutouts had black T-shirts reading "Fix Facebook." The display was organized by the global advocacy group VAZ with a goal to call attention to the hundreds of millions of fake accounts still spreading disinformation on Facebook. Now, more than 1,000 flights have been cancelled in Germany after public sector airport workers went on strike to demand higher salaries. Verdi, a labor union that represents 2 million public sector workers, said that airport staff, including security guards and firefighters, were striking at Frankfurt, Munich, Cologne, and Bremen airports. The union is calling for a 6% annual raise for its workers and is using the strike to promote its cause ahead of negotiations. Hundreds of African asylum seekers and Israeli activists have protested in Tel Aviv against the government's decision to deport thousands of people to Uganda. African migrants held banners during the demonstration against new deportation measures. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently announced a settlement deal with the UN, but backtracked shortly after following increased criticism from within his own government. And a video showing an Israeli sniper shooting a motionless Palestinian across the border in Gaza has become public. The release of the video comes after a week of daily protests by Palestinians at the Gaza-Israeli border, in which 30 people have been shot dead. Palestinian officials and human rights activists have criticized Israeli supports for the actions of Israeli snipers filmed celebrating after shooting Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army has said it will investigate. And finally, El Salvador is celebrating International Circus Day with a show of some unique performers from around the world. For Salvadorians, the circus is not only a game, it's a way to transform society through art. Clowns from Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, Mexico, Costa Rica, the United States and Spain are putting on special performances. Performers believe that the circus can transform society in a much more effective way than politics can. It's also a tool to keep children away from violence in one of the countries with the highest rates of violence in the region. And that has brought us to the end of this newscast, but for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
We are always there tracking the news.